All right, so on this model, this is one eye that we are looking at. Well, it's looking at us. And you can see clearly it's a ball. And the posterior section will show us the optic nerve, and that is cranial nerve 2. So the very thin layer that you see that's represented in glass here that covers only the anterior portion of the eye is known as the cornea. Now, the cornea is just on the colored region or the anterior part. All of the white part is the sclera. Okay, and the white part is the fibrous covering. So if we were gonna like peel it off like an onion, then we would have cornea first, then sclera, and then we would see the retina, and then in between is the choroid layer. The choroid layer, yeah, so this is the sclera, this is the retina, and the red in between is representing the choroid layer. The choroid layer is what holds the blood vessels to the surface or the back of the eye. The retina is what has all the photoreceptors, which are the rods and cones. So both of them need to exist in those layers for it to function. Now, the area that you see in this internal view is where the optic nerve leaves. And in that region, we don't have any photoreceptors. And so on this model, it's kind of showing you that it's not orange there. So therefore, that is the blind spot. So there is typically a dip very close to the optic disc. And that dip is known as the fovea centralis. And you can't really see it on these models that well. And the yellow structure that we see here is known as the macula lutea. I'm guessing that this dip maybe is fovea centralis. And the yellow outline is the macula lutea. All right, so let's switch gears to the anterior portion again. So if I were to take the cornea off, I would see the colored part of the eye called the iris. Now the iris has a hole or an opening that lets light shine through. That opening is known as the pupil. Now the region or chamber between the cornea and the next structure, the lens, is known as the anterior chamber. It's a lot smaller and shorter compared to after we take the lens off. This entire structure is representing the posterior chamber. Now on models, they're not filled with the liquid, but they are vitreous humor in the posterior chamber and aqueous humor in the anterior chamber. So the lens kind of sits itself and does accommodation because of the ciliary body that's represented in these lines here. It is a muscle that's constantly holding this together and reshaping the lens so that we can focus. The lens is also held in place by this muscle that looks like finger-like projections to the lateral side of it, and those are known as the suspensory ligaments. Now, just do body. Oh, suspensory ligaments would be specific area of the ciliary body. That's, a separate term, really. So if we were going to do the extraocular muscles, it's important to remember that there are 3 cranial nerves that help us move our eyeball. And those mnemonics that I gave you in lecture are going to be really helpful. Your lateral rectus, LR6, is innervated by the abducens nerve, and your SO4 stands for superior oblique, and that's innervated by your trochlear nerve. Everything else, extraocular muscle-wise, is innervated by cranial nerve 3, which is ocular motor. So let's look at where these are. And I would have to tell you, bless you, I would have to tell you if it was a right or left eye. Otherwise, you would look at where the lacrimal gland is. The lacrimal gland is always on the lateral side of the eyeball. So if this is on the lateral side of the eyeball, I'm going to assume, let's call this a right eye. So if that's the case, this would be the medial rectus. This would be the lateral rectus, superior rectus, and then underneath we see the inferior rectus. The two obliques are in the oblique direction. So this is superior oblique. And what do we know about this innervation?
SO4.
SO4.
So trochlear.
You got it. And then inferior oblique is cut off, but it's represented here by this muscle, which is a little more diagonal on the inferior side. So that
Where's the superior?
How about the